But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens would mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens.
So
are you surprised the Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Welcome to Yeah Nah Pasaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
And I'm Andy Fleming.
And joining us from Portland, Oregon, in his fortified bunker, Jason Wilson. Thanks for joining us, Jason.
Thanks for having me on again.
How's things going in ISO?
Yeah, not too bad. I am well supplied. I am healthy so far. I am a person who has worked from home pretty much for a number of years now. Normally, I would intersperse my working from home with travel to places where there are stories, and that's clearly not possible now. But, you know, I'm trying to do what I can in terms of reporting on stuff, and I'm actually finding that there are a lot of, you know, if you know your way around Google, there's actually a lot of material out there that I don't think people know that they're making public. Let's just put it that way. and so it's still possible to report from home. But yeah, I mean, we, in the state of Oregon, at the level of government, mostly we have to deal with incompetence rather than, you know, outright drooling sadism as you find in some other states. And so they locked down pretty efficiently, pretty early. People seem to have been complying with that. And for now, it looks like Oregon might have dodged the bullet that hit the state of Washington just over the border. So that's good. But, you know, I mean, obviously everyone needs to sort of like maintain their vigilance and keep looking out for one another and hope that the federal government doesn't somehow intervene and make things worse.
So the reason we've got you on is because obviously there is this public health crisis globally, and you've written a few things recently. So we thought we'd get you on to talk about NRL Island.
I'm obviously supportive of NRL Island, and I think that it could be a beacon of light in a very dark time.
It's as far as I'm concerned, it's an AFL world. So if the NRL wants an island, they can have an island.
Well, where is the innovation from AFL on this? I mean, where's their island, or I don't know, maybe the desert? They could go to the desert. I don't know, something. But you know, whichever sport solves this problem will be the only sport being broadcast for a number of months. So you know, let's hope it's the good guys.
You've also written a few things about how the right is reacting to the coronavirus crisis, which is why we actually have you on. Mm-hmm. You wrote something earlier in the week about how the far right is reacting, and also something about how that was just published on Tuesday about how the right in general is reacting, although it seems there's a fair bit of crossover these days.
Yeah.
What have you found when you were looking to how the far right is responding to this current situation?
So I think that it's possible for crises to accelerate things that were already happening sometimes. Video conferencing was at some kind of rudimentary stage, and I'm sure by the end of this, every university and company and, you know, club or whatever is going to have video conferencing pretty nailed. But on the right, it's accelerated a pretty big set of fissures. And actually, I've just got something out in Guardian Australia. It talks about three main paths that I can see the right taking out of this. There is a fair bit of either outright denialism or, you know, minimizing this whole thing. And a lot of that is on the Christian right or particular conspiracy-minded parts of the right that think it's all a psyop, or, you know, just MAGA people who, you know, don't want this to be kind of blamed on the president. And then there are people who, I mean, Scott Morrison is a case in point here, people who grudgingly abandon the sort of doctrine of austerity that they've nurtured for a lifetime and, you know, actually just sort of do something, however inadequate and belated, to kind of address the emergency, you know, realizing that neoliberal capitalism is actually not a particularly resilient system and that they're just going to have to kind of do what they can to ensure that their economies and nation states kind of survive this problem. And then there are people, I think, who, and a lot of these people are either, they're people from Steve Bannon right, basically, right out into the neo-Nazi right, who have actually been taking this stuff seriously for a long time, a lot of the time. I mean, Bannon started doing special podcasts on the pandemic in late January when almost no one in corporate media was talking about that. People were still fixated on the primaries and impeachment. And these guys have taken it seriously. And you've also got, farther out to the right, you've got accelerationists, eco-fascists who have been kind of predicting or anticipating this kind of crisis and certainly have accepted that it's real. And those kind of groups, I guess, from Bannon right are the biggest concern for me at the moment, because they're actually looking to exploit this crisis that they clearly recognise they clearly recognise the seriousness of this crisis, and they're looking to exploit it. And so I think Bannon, for example, is using it he's reacting to this as a nationalist. So he's seeing it as a threat to the United States, and he's trying to, he's making these kind of bipartisan gestures because he wants to have fighting this virus be a kind of a nationalist sort of enterprise. And he's also trying to set up a conflict with China, with the People's Republic of China. Out on the neo-Nazi far right, these guys, accelerationists, for example, want to do what they can to ensure the collapse of liberal democracies, which they see as decadent. And, so they're looking to leverage this crisis to introduce greater instability into, the system, as they call it. So, yeah, I mean, that kind of frame of mind is my concern at the moment. The people who actually have a pretty decent analysis of the scope of this crisis and are thinking about ways to sort of exploit it to undermine whatever democracy and rights that folks in the US have.
Did you happen to see Curtis Yarvin's coronavirus take? I
did not. I would love to hear about it, though.
It's weird because it starts off...
Who's Curtis Ken?
Moldbug. He's sort of an alt-right blogger, I guess. Jason, would you say he's considered like one of their philosophers, perhaps?
Yeah, I would say he's the sort of figurehead, intellectual figurehead in a lot of ways of the neo-reactionary movement, for sure.
Yeah. He threw something up on Medium about the coronavirus, which starts off sort of reasonably, which is, talking about how serious it is, and I think notes that, there are people on the right who aren't taking it seriously, or, who think it's a psyop or a hoax or whatever. And he goes into a lot of detail about, just how dreadful it is, and then gets to the point where he suggests that what we're going to need to do is suspend democracy and have some sort of special coronavirus leader for a while. And it's very similar to, I think, his normal we need to suspend democracy
yeah
just with a bit of virus tacked on.
I mean, it is a worry at the moment, I guess, that, my sort of, I've largely been calm and tried to occupy myself with work, but my overall frame of mind, veers around a little. And some days I look around and see all the mutual aid projects and see, the way communities are responding, and also see, like, for example, subnational governments, like the states here in the United States, are just kind of like bracketing the federal government and finding ways to cooperate. And that makes me think that there is a sort of, counterweight to whatever the federal government is doing. There's a sort of institutional counterweight, as well as a sort of fundamental instinct down at the community level for people to get together and help each other. But yeah, I mean, national emergencies where, you have emergency legislation that allows you to sort of order people inside for an indeterminate length of time. Obviously there are historical pathways that we wouldn't want to kind of go any further down. And yeah, like, obviously, like, there's a public health, there is a kind of authoritarianism abroad at the moment. And I think in Australia, you saw pretty draconian penalties put in place before people had actually been given a chance to cooperate with a clearly spelled out set of guidelines. And so it's everywhere. And you don't even need to go to Hungary, where democracy has basically been swept aside. Orban's taken this as an opportunity to just kind of like introduce a fascist state, more or less. I mean, I don't know what else to call it. So these kinds of people, Bannon's not as smart as he thinks he is, but he's pretty smart relative to the Trump movement. And there's an obvious opportunity for those kind of guys here to sort of roll back the liberal international order, roll back the global economy and whatever we might think of that global capitalist economy. I mean, these guys are not rolling it back in order to bring about something more just, right?
Is it a question of rolling it back or, recommending a certain form of restructuring?
Yeah. Why don't you say more? Because
there's a recent, I think it was published in late March, an interview with Chomsky on this subject. And he was, basically arguing that a neoliberal capitalist order is compatible with highly authoritarian regimes. And in fact, it's a longer argument, but he looks back at its, if you look at the doctrines of the so-called neoliberals in, von Mises and Hayek and so on and so forth, Mises welcomed fascist governments in Europe, not because they were, on the basis that they were smashing organised labour, which was the real danger to the rule of untrammelled capitalism, or, was one of the few political sources of opposition to capital. So, I mean, I get your point, but I often find that the kinds of, and the extent to which there's the back and forth between opening and closing borders of one sort or another, these are often strategic, tactical questions that don't go to the core questions of what determines a capitalist order, I suppose.
That's a really fair point. I mean, I think, for whatever my assessment of this is worth, I think that what Bannon really does think that he's promoting a set of ideas which are about bringing manufacturing back onshore. It's kind of like a producerist thing almost. But yeah, I mean, put a set of ideas out there into the world, and people are going to implement them in all sorts of ways. And I agree that with what you say, that there are examples like Chile, right? Like where neoliberal reform and authoritarianism kind of went very obviously went hand in hand. I mean, the interesting thing, I guess, is seeing people in Australia, for example, brought who wouldn't maybe normally have to deal with it, brought face to face with what a neoliberal welfare system looks like. And, in my hopeful moments, I wonder if those kinds of experiences will actually lead people, when this is done, to sort of demand that those become more like services that help people out when the economy doesn't, tosses them aside through no fault of their own. Or, here, I mean, I just really hope that people come out of this really wanting as a priority a sort of some kind of system of universal healthcare in this country, because people are already getting $30,000 US dollar bills for coronavirus treatment. I mean, it's insane. So that's my hopeful moments. But yeah, I mean, like, there's obviously, what else is happening now? I mean, a whole pool of desperate people now exists who don't have jobs, who aren't sure where their future jobs will come from, who maybe are employed in, sectors of the economy that just won't come back in the same way. There are Amazon workers going on strike and demanding, adequate safety provisions while they work. There are grocery workers doing the same thing. There's a lot of stuff happening. And I'm not going to say it's spontaneous, because I'm sure it requires a lot of organising and work, but it's not, it's outside the sort of formal labour movement in the United States. So I see those as reasons to hope, but I also see a very precarious situation with millions, literally probably millions of people at this point who don't have income and can't buy food and are reliant on charity, basically, because there isn't much of a safety net. And how much power those people are going to have relative to a state that's enforcing emergency powers. Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think?
Okay. Well, one question I have in terms of the effect of the virus on Trump is in terms of locating or understanding precisely what or who constitutes his support base and to what extent they themselves are especially vulnerable or not to this health and economic crisis. So to the extent that they are, I mean, I guess I wonder, are many of them, how profoundly affected are they? And is it any more or less than the general population?
Yeah, it's really tough to know at the moment. I think the people most immediately affected, basically any employee, any service industry employee in the United States. So like people who work in restaurants and bars, people who work in most retail, except for grocery stores and chemists, even a lot of healthcare workers, weirdly, because emergency room, one of the phenomena of this thing is that emergency room visits go way down because people aren't driving around and going out drinking on a Saturday night and whatever, doing the kinds of stuff that people do. And so they're not winding up in the emergency room. So you're actually seeing hospital layoffs to a really huge extent. But like there's obviously, the working class is, the working class in the service industries are the ones who were immediately suffering. But, their employers are more like the core of the Trump base. And the same people who've voted Republican forever. They're suburban, they're wealthier than the median American. They own a fast food franchise or a used car lot or whatever. And all of those businesses now are basically, they've received some aid from the Trump administration, but ultimately Trump doesn't care much about those people either. And so they're going to be in a ton of trouble if this lockdown goes for, a couple of months. And also, it is true, it's been overstated, in terms of how crucial this sort of demographic was to his victory. But it is certainly true that lower income white people in rural areas, voted for Trump. And, they're really in a lot of trouble right now. And I think that the main political question in the United States over the next 6 months, let's say, is whether the Republican Party can convince those people that actually the blame does not belong with the president, it belongs with the Chinese Communist Party. And that is the relentless message that you're starting to see hammered by all kinds of people across the right and in the Australian right as well, by the way. There are a bunch of people who've taken this opportunity to write op-eds this week about China and how we need to confront them or, stop pussyfooting around. Chris Ullman wrote something. Greg Sheridan wrote something. You've got these folks making those arguments already. And look, I have no sympathy or allegiance or any kind of time for the Chinese state. But Western politicians knew about this from January at the latest when Hubei was locked down, and no one. It seems to me that all in the US and Australia, which are the countries I follow the most closely, no one did anything in January. No one really did anything in February. While it was setting Europe alight, what did they think was going to happen? That argument will be crucial, and I just don't know if the Democrats or the Australian Labor Party, for that matter, are capable of getting to the position of moral clarity where you're able to make that argument.
We have an election in the United States, a presidential election in, 7 months or so.
Yeah.
So the other question that occurs to me is, one would think that this, given the nature of the crisis and it being centred upon health and the US not having a public health care system to speak of, a Democratic candidate who openly endorsed one would presumably gain some support. So, but I'm not sure that Biden, who is the most likely candidate, or the Democratic Party as a whole is really, I mean, maybe it is, but I'm not aware of it making a strong position using this crisis to make that case and to actually commit themselves to a public healthcare system. So what can you say about those on the other side of the aisle?
I don't know. I mean, it's a really delicate and interesting moment. I think there's going to be a massive constituency really, really soon for a more substantive and effective social safety net. And that means healthcare. It means, unemployment benefits. It means your food security, is a problem right now. And so the Democrats are captured to some extent by a particular faction of corporate America who are their major donors. And, they historically, especially recently, have resisted making any kind of commitment to, or thoroughgoing commitment to that kind of safety net. But, it's kind of like you can get dragged into that if there's sufficient sustained pressure. And if capitalism itself is at stake, I guess that adds some motivation. And I think that's what, that's what people don't say about the New Deal, that it was actually a product of a really constrained set of choices and the product of someone who is really trying to save capitalism and not necessarily trying to secure the individual welfare of every citizen. And so I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, there's an opening here for sure, I think, for the Democrats who have shown that they don't have any ideas that they've generated themselves for how to address this. They're still talking about means-tested welfare and all that kind of stuff, all that third-way stuff. They just haven't adjusted to what's going on. But there is a chance that they might be dragged kicking and screaming by circumstances and by just sheer popular anger into doing something decent. But who knows?
I would have thought that one of the dangers of, depending on your perspective, but as you indicated in, I think, one of your recent articles in reference to Bannon in particular, their preparedness to endorse those sorts of measures to better secure the working population of the United States from the unconstrained free market forces. So it may be the case that the right or elements of the right will actually be able to and are in a position to assume those policies and steal that ground from what would otherwise be considered a nominally left position, and you develop some kind of quasi red-brown politics, and which would also draw in elements of the nominal left.
I mean, like using lowercase letters. I think it's just simplest to call it National Socialism, right? I mean, I don't mean to exaggerate or try to, make kind of claims that are, anyway, I don't mean to exaggerate, but that's kind of like the vision I would say that Bannon has. It's a kind of like, It's racist in the sense that it's obsessed with immigration across the southern border. But, I think if Bannon was left to implement it, it would be a kind of civic nationalism in the sense that he would want to address anyone who's a citizen, at least to some extent. But yeah, it would be like, let's look after American citizens as a part of a nationalist project where we confront, this satanic Chinese regime who's our challenger, who's our main challenger, who are looking to displace us as the dominant superpower or whatever. That's what it is. It's National Socialism. It's like let's extend welfare to our citizens. Let's look after them, and in return, we're going to ask them to kind of support this renewed, I suppose, Cold War, really. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that is seductive. And God, a nominally leftist podcast, I guess, had Bannon on as a guest over the weekend. And then you had someone from another leftist podcast saying that he was, that Bannon was somehow less dangerous than Joe Biden. And I think there isn't a lot of people, influential voices on the left aren't thinking about how seductive that discourse is and how it's absolutely not going to wind up. It's got nothing to do with justice, nothing to do with equality, nothing to do with binding communities and creating solidarity. It's just about war and division. We'll see if people wake up to that. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you that it's a huge danger, and there is a kind of seductive quality to this sort of, if you've got a better term than lowercase National Socialism, I'm happy to hear it. But, there's a seductiveness to this because it's populist. It's opposed to the the liberal establishment and the conservative establishment. It's kind of promising a sort of welfare. It's opposed to, at least on the surface, opposed to, neoliberal global capitalism. So it's like ticking a lot of these boxes that some people on the populist left want ticked, and it's not entirely forthcoming about the rest of the project.
So, Jason, on that cheery note, we're going to have to go. Thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right, that's all we've got time for, Andy. We're going to have a few more questions for Jason on the podcast version of this, though, if people want to check that out at 3cr.org.au/passaran. Global Intifada is up next.
See you later. See you next week.
Jason, I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the role that a conspiracy theory is playing in how all of this is playing out. In your article in The Guardian about how the right is responding, you noted that Candace Owens, for example, is sort of claiming that some of the victims of the coronavirus are just a complete hoax. I guess the implication is that they don't exist, or that the big coronavirus is trying to pump up the numbers by including people dying of other things. But then on sort of, I guess, on the other end of the scale, you've had the case of the neo-Nazi who was busted before he could blow up a hospital. And you had the train derailment in California as well, where someone tried to run a train into a hospital ship because he thought there was something nefarious going on. I guess somewhere in the middle you've got 5G towers being burnt down. What do you make of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I'm seeing from almost every government agency here in the US, from FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, who are kind of nominally one of the agencies in charge of the national response, right down to state governments and even at the county level, everyone is saying, don't listen to misinformation, here are the facts. Like you're seeing in the government response that there's clearly a huge problem here, which is that people are being kind of lied to and they're accepting those lies and acting accordingly. So there are different levels. I mean, there are people who deny that the virus, is any worse than the flu. And so like Bill Mitchell, who's a kind of arch MAGA guy on Twitter, has a big Twitter account and a podcast. He's like been pumping out all these misleading statistics to say it's not true. And Candace Owens as well, who you mentioned, she's just kind of been like, she's pivoted from saying the virus is made up to saying like the deaths are a hoax, and she's asking people to pass through information which shows that the people who have been recorded as coronavirus victims are not actually dying from that. Then you've got people who accept that the virus is real, but who are saying like, oh, it's a bioweapon that China deliberately created, or it's real, kind of, but the government are using it as the basis of a psyop to kind of like, take our freedoms. These are just ways of ignoring the most obvious story here, which is that Western governments knew about this from January at the latest, and mostly they didn't do anything to plan for it or prepare for it. And, they were all making it up on the fly from kind of like mid-March onwards. Whatever the People's Republic of China did, they had a couple of months and they didn't do anything with it. So, anything that can kind of distract people from that, I guess, is welcome, especially to incumbents. But yeah, I mean, more broadly about conspiracy theory, I mean, I just think that the 5G thing is a really good example of how, I mean, I know that you're a scholar of QAnon, Cam. Mm. I just feel like the thing that we used to call QAnon is almost now like this sort of huge conspiracy thinking machine that can just absorb anything that happens into it, and it's just this kind of huge kaleidoscopic conspiracy theory that just kind of includes everything now. And the 5G stuff is all up in those kind of networks and communities now. I mean, maybe you don't agree.
Jason, can you explain to the listeners what the significance of 5G is in this context?
Oh, okay. So, 5G is the next, protocol for mobile phone communication. Most of us are on 4G now, but 5G, it uses a different part of the spectrum. It transfers data more efficiently, blah, 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 blah. It's just, better. And it's long been the subject of conspiracy theories about, like Wi-Fi, I guess, that maybe it causes cancer, maybe it's, mind control rays, maybe it's toxic or whatever. And that hasn't been helped by the fact that the Chinese company Huawei, which has a close relationship with the Chinese state, which is also a major constructor of 5G infrastructure internationally, has authentically been, caught up in scandals in Canada and elsewhere where, it seems like they have been trying to put backdoors into telecommunications infrastructure so that the Chinese state has opportunities to do surveillance and what have you. But now, to put it simply, the whole 5G thing has been smashed together with coronavirus. And there's an idea that is frighteningly prevalent that 5G actually causes coronavirus. And that is seen as something that the People's Republic of China has done and is responsible for. And so, I guess we have to be slightly hesitant to confidently characterise the sabotage of 5G infrastructure that's happened in the UK. Because the last time I checked, we don't actually know what that person's motives were. But it is striking that it happened at a time when there's a surge in conspiracy theories on every social media platform. But Facebook is crucial here, which are, positing this connection between 5G and coronavirus. And it's not going to be surprising if it does turn out that that's why 5G towers are being sabotaged in the UK. And I would expect that to happen in other countries as well as this thing kind of drags on.
What's Alex Jones's position?
Well, he's in a tough spot. He's in a tough spot. I mean, anyone who's a Trump supporter, as he is, he's an arch Trump supporter. He's going to die in a ditch for Trump. And Trump's own position has kind of moved around enough so that anyone who's trying to shadow his position is going to seem to have been slightly inconsistent as well. I mean, Trump started out denying it pretty much, and then, eventually came around to saying it was a serious matter, and then backed off a bit, and then said, maybe it's fine because we've got hydroxychloroquine, and he's kind of been all over the shop. Alex Jones is kind of wound up in this position where, so the last time I checked, his position was there is a virus, but it's a Chinese bioweapon, and the deep state is going to use this to destroy the republic. So everyone but Trump is kind of implicated, I suppose, in the conspiracy. So, that's a professional right there.
I understand that he's lost a few court cases recently. He has struggled to maintain a large social media platform. Is his voice less important than it was a year or two, or prior to Trump's presidency?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think he peaked probably in 2016, 2017. At one point there, he was a major, almost surrogate really for Trump. He had, millions of subscribers on YouTube. He had a really big platform on Facebook and Twitter as well. And then I think, after Charlottesville, he was just one of the guys in the sights and lost a lot of those platforms. He's also lost a few. I mean, he's also syndicated on radio, but he's lost a little bit of that syndication as these lawsuits, which involve incredibly bad optics, go down the pipeline. Look, yeah, he's less influential. He still worries me because he still does have a sizable audience, and he's probably become even more radical, rhetorically, since he got deplatformed. And the stuff his remaining audience is getting now is pretty undiluted. I don't know what that guy who tried to ram a ship with a train was listening to. I mean, he sounded maybe more like a QAnon guy. I'd probably defer to Cam here. But, it's possible that these conspiracy broadcasters are still bringing vulnerable individuals to do really silly things.
Yeah, I think my read on Alex Jones would be at the same time as this was being deplatformed, which was all to do with his stuff from 2012, really, about Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
At the same time as he was doing that, the conspiracy world had sort of moved in this QAnon direction, which that was a train that he didn't get on, or he couldn't get on. They had their own sort of QAnon figure on the Alex Jones show for a while, like coming on and decoding their own secret messages from the president. But then I think they were denounced by the so-called real QAnon, and that might have all come together to diminish his influence a bit.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's interesting. I mean, we could talk about, how conspiracy thinking used to be the product of guys like Alex Jones, and his predecessors. And, they were kind of at the center of these subcultures. They were the celebrities at the center of them. And now it's the creation and promotion of conspiracy theories is much more spread out across a movement, I guess, which is really interesting. Yeah, Alex Jones, he denounced, I think, he had a shot at Q last week. I didn't listen to the full text of that. I just saw reporting on it. I didn't listen to the full recording, but it seems like he's actually been put in this position where he feels like he has to, directly criticize the QAnon stuff. And it all sort of suggests that, his thing is kind of a little obsolete in an era where people are producing this kind of like stuff collaboratively, these overarching conspiracy theories collaboratively. It's a very strange thing.
I mean, that's the question that we were talking about just before the show started was, what is it going to take to shake those people out of that and to shake just the general MAGA people out of their thing? Like, how bad can it get before the QAnon types think, oh, maybe there isn't a plan?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know. I mean, I thought about a similar question a lot when I was covering wildfires in Northern California a couple of years back. And, I was just vox popping people at one point and saying, like, has this changed your view of climate change? And people were saying no. And I since then I've kind of even wondered if it's ever the right question to ask, like whether a horrible traumatic experience can change people's political opinions. I mean, I think that this is a horrible disease and lots of people are going to get really sick and it's going to be really awful, and that is the kind of thing that changes people on an individual level, but that kind of change isn't predictable, and that's a function of kind of trauma, really. So, we don't want that. Is it going to change people's minds? I don't know. I think that I kind of tend to think that people's minds are made up. If you're still a Trump supporter now, I can't imagine what would
ever change that.
And it's just going to be a question of numbers. And look, I don't want to get into ill-fated predictions here, but even before this hit, and he's managing it really badly, and the small poll bump he got appears to have dissipated already, and he was already very unpopular. I mean, he was unpopular in November 2016, and in some ways, this few 100,000 voters in a few swing states. I don't know if I want to say it was a fluke, but he was fortunate. I thought even before this hit that he was becoming steadily more unpopular. I didn't see where he was going to get new voters, and I still don't. And a lot of his voters are going to die, and that's an unpredictable thing too, because Democrats will as well. But certainly don't see where he's going to get new voters from. I would hope that some people actually look at what's happened and look at the way he's managed this and look at, like, I don't know, what looks like a serious corruption around the distribution of medical resources, and the president in the middle of a pandemic proposing the use of unproven treatments. I would hope people look at that and go, wow, this is not good.
Do you think there's any significant shift of opinion within the Republican Party where things have developed to such an extent where he's, obviously totally inept, to put it mildly, espousing quack cures, that they might think, well, we can, is there capacity within the Republican Party for opposition to Trump to manifest? Because if you look at the results of the process of nominating him as president, there's been almost none. But I'm wondering if there aren't more senior figures, or are there senior figures within Republicans who are thinking, well, we can no longer afford to be on the Trump train.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think I've been thinking about, and this is not necessarily, if this is not a welcome, not necessarily, it is not at all a welcome prospect. But I've been thinking about whether over a certain body count and at a certain level of instability, whether, the national security state might actually at least find a way to sideline the guy. I just don't know. The pressure valve at the moment seems to be the states just doing what they can to make things work. But yeah, I think that if the country really seriously started to fall apart, I wonder whether it would even be beyond the gift of the Republican Party at that point. I don't know. It's concerning time, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, the Republican Party today, the majority, a Supreme Court majority, including 2 judges that Trump appointed, made a ruling that said that even though it's a pandemic, the Wisconsin primary tomorrow, there's not going to be any kind of emergency postal voting. People are actually going to have to show up to the polling booth to vote, and that's voter suppression, and it's voter suppression endorsed by a Supreme Court that Trump, the 20% of which, or whatever it is, appointed, and so they're getting what they want. It would have to take a lot of instability and a lot of, a significant and obvious threat to some kind of interest of theirs for them to act. I mean, they know who this guy is. They know what he is and what he's doing and the damage he's doing, and it just doesn't matter. It suits them.
I guess on a slightly different topic, did you see that the US government has designated its first white supremacist foreign terrorist organisation?
Yes, indeed.
Because there was a lot of speculation that it was going to be your mates at the base.
Yeah, so according to the Times, and they have better national security sources than me, let's say, they were actually going out of their way to find an organisation where there would be no non-US members. Well, no non-US members, because then, the problem that the FBI has is that they at least have to pay lip service to the First Amendment. So they're not allowed to, list domestic groups. You can't criminalize Americans for holding particular opinions. As far as Americans concerned, at least officially and publicly, they can only go after criminal behavior, and they always insist that they're not monitoring groups. No one really believes that is true in practical terms, but there's a certain sort of etiquette, I suppose, that they have to adhere to, and that kind of stuff does matter when it comes to prosecutions. So even if they're monitoring people in a way that pushes the First Amendment, they're going to have trouble with those prosecutions if it emerges that it's been based on surveillance of a group rather than investigation of criminal behaviour. And so that's basically what the Times said. They've tried to find a group where there would be no kind of First Amendment complications and no Americans involved, so that they wouldn't have to kind of worry about that stuff. And that sounds kind of plausible to me, but I'm sure they started looking for a group in Russia.
Yeah.
And
I came up with the Russian Imperial Movement.
Yeah.
Who I had to look up.
Yeah, I think I had heard of them, but I hadn't thought about them beyond hearing about them. But I'm sure that this is a kind of intended as a kind of message to Russia and reflects a belief on the part of the FBI, true or not, that, Russia is somehow involved in sponsoring or assisting white supremacist groups that are advocating terror in the United States. And that sure does kind of bring the base to mind, doesn't it? But yeah, they didn't go after Azov Battalion, which
that would have been. That was my guess for what it was going to be if it wasn't going to be, the base. There's also some speculation that maybe Atomwaffen, just based on the fact that it had these offshoots in other countries, might be the one. But I was thinking those were maybe unlikely because they were US-based, ostensibly.
Yeah, but if you think about that sort of constitutional complication, it does actually make sense.
But then, my guess would have been Azov.
Yeah, but Azov, I suppose, has had US members and some sort of US connection. And also, I mean, I don't know. It's in the Ukraine, isn't it? It's in Ukraine. It's not in Russia. I don't know. Who knows if that's a factor? I mean, probably that they're going after. They're not going to go after a US ally. But yeah. I mean, look. I think that's, organizations like the SPLC and the ADL, the sort of more mainstream NGOs that are, human rights, civil rights NGOs are happy. That I reported that on the weekend as well, that they're happy that the FBI is giving sustained attention to these groups. I guess as a reporter, it's my job to worry about what the implications and precedents are here. What does it mean that they've now expanded beyond? I mean, the vast majority of the groups listed as international terrorist groups by the FBI are jihadi groups, and now it's white supremacist groups. And I guess who's next? I mean, a lot of the writers I read and respect on the danger of the far right say that one of the principal dangers is that they elicit crackdowns from the state, and those crackdowns are then extended to people who have nothing to do with white supremacy, who are involved in other kinds of political groups, radical or not, and crackdowns get generalized. I guess that would be my one concern. One question would be whether or not this is functioning as a sort of message to the Russian government, and what the implications of that are. And another is, I guess, a sort of implicit admission that there's not much they can do about groups that have some sort of US ties, apart from, I guess, investigating the criminal behaviour. Maybe that's all they should do anyway, but it seems like this listing is a kind of admission of that we can't actually, if any groups kind of touch the US, we can't really define them as a terrorist organisation.
Jason, speaking of the base, has there been any further developments since the beginning of the year? And also, speaking of Russia, given that the one of the central figures apparently lives in Russia.
Well, so there was a good story in New York Magazine last week. A very intrepid reporter over there had built on the reporting that we did and the BBC did, and actually gone around and talked to people who knew the guy and banged on a few doors. And this is Ronaldo Nazaro, aka Norman Spear, the founder of the base. People who knew him at college and school and said he was a kind of mellow stoner who was into grunge back in the 90s. And also was a member for a time of the DSA, believe it or not.
It's Bernie Bro.
Perhaps changed somewhat after he served overseas. In the army, it seems, although that detail wasn't particularly nailed down. But yeah, it seems like a very strange kind of story. I think since I last spoke to you, there have been more arrests of people who were in Atomwaffen, and at least one or two of them were double patched in the base, at least for a time. So,
I did see this week that they've started releasing some of those guys as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think
for Rona reasons.
US attorneys are trying as hard as they can to keep those guys inside, and they're pulling out all the stops, but sometimes it just doesn't work if it's a non-violent offence, and the person meets the criteria for release during a pandemic. So there's a lot of talk on Telegram from accelerationists and eco-fascist groups about how this is their opportunity, but I really think that those arrests, plus a lot of the journalism that was done, plus the work that anti-fascist activists did has really put a lot of pressure on those movements. And a lot of those guys, it's kind of deprived, I think, the movement of probably its best and most charismatic organising talent. And I'm not sure where that accelerationist movement is actually at this point and how coherent or effective it is. Now, the problem is, of course, that there is still very much an atmosphere, I suppose, on Telegram, constituted by a whole bunch of channels and accounts that might only have one guy running them, but which are sort of trying to black pill people and urging them on to acts of lone wolf terrorism. And, only takes one guy, right? That's still a problem. But I feel like there are other bigger worries at the moment, which are just about the stakes in this country on any kind of protracted civil unrest, just given the amount of guns that are here and the sort of people who will trying to see that as an opportunity and take advantage of it to promote, to pursue their own political projects. And so like militia groups and just the Trump people really as well, just the Republicans who may find ways to exploit the situation. They're more worrying to me, I guess, at the moment than the remaining accelerationists who just seem more like an internet thing than they ever have in some ways.
The other tendency, which has been described as the movementist tendency represented by figures like Richard Spencer and so on, they appear to be in some degree of disarray as well. And we have the example of the former leader of the National Socialist Movement and Matthew Heimbach from the Traditionalist Worker Party, both declaring themselves to no longer be right-wing radicals and so on and so forth. And given the general, I guess, context of the impossibility almost of conducting street mobilisations, where do you think that they can revive under these circumstances, or is their road kind of, finished for the time being?
My gut and from what I can see of the trends says no. It says that upsurge on the explicitly, white nationalist far right is really, they've been struck a lot of blows since 2017, but especially in the last year. And yeah, they can't, summer marching season isn't looking great. Their crowds were declining anyway. But the problem is that I think they did succeed in changing the discourse and changing the sort of taboos and what it's possible to say in US politics. And they did a really good job in some ways as well of making the Trump administration seem less radical, relatively speaking. Now they've sort of changed the way in which the FBI is talking about enforcement of political groups. And yeah, I mean, I feel like they actually achieved quite a lot. I mean, I think they made anti-Semitism kind of, permissible in a political sense, more so than it has been probably since the end of the Second World War. I think that whole idea of demographic replacement is pretty mainstream now. Conspiracy theories like the whole cultural Marxism thing are pretty mainstream now. Anti-fascism, which really was more almost entirely confined to the far right before this, is now sort of, the president is yelling about Antifa. I think they have changed right-wing politics a lot. The fact is that the Republicans are going to be in government nationally, about half the time at least. And so if you change the Republican Party, you kind of, it gives you quite a lot of leverage over the country. So, yeah, but I think the actual, I don't know, what do we want to call them? Issue entrepreneurs, the actual groups and individuals that push this, throughout the late teens, I suppose, are in steep decline. And probably, going back underground, really, at various, not all at the same pace, but all they've got left for recruitment is Telegram. They don't have free run of social media anymore. I'm aware that a lot of groups are simply claiming to have disbanded and are just now confined to encrypted chats with the people they've already recruited. The FBI's on their case and is actively looking at these groups, and that kind of thing trickles down to local law enforcement eventually. So, yeah, I think, they had this kind of moment from about 2015, solidly to late 2017, more and more constricted from 2018 on, and really got hammered from about September, October last year. And I just think that moment maybe has dissipated, but that, white nationalist ideology has kind of, infiltrated the ideology of the ostensibly mainstream right to a much greater extent than it had 5 years ago.
Well, I think we might actually leave it there.
Okay, cool.
On another cheery note.
Yeah.
We doubled down.
The question is, I suppose, if there are still elections, that's not electorally appealing in a country that's heading in the apparent demographic direction that the United States is. So that's the problem. But, we'll see.
Seven beers ago. Sitting on the front stoop, wonder what we gonna do, what the world come to, who you gonna run to. Another year older and deeper in debt. A mother robbed the press so damn. You pay those bills and you get that rent. A mother robbed the press so damn. I would love the bag in the Cadillac. Rolling down to D.C. to get my money back. Man, this is awesome. I love the wish I'd run. I bury me cash in the big black coffin. I'm running through the White House, mask on, lights out. The Oval Office light. Empty your pockets. Well, I ain't seen grain since I don't know when. I'm on the rob the press so damn. I don't make no money, don't make no sound. I'm on the rob the press so damn. You gotta pay those bills, you gotta get that rent. I'm on the rob the press so damn. Another year older and deeper and down. I'm on the rob the press so damn. Walk through the doorway looking so cool. Homesick shoulder feeling old school. Walk through the doorway feeling old school. Homesick shoulder looking so cold. On the floor and give me your loot. Come on, mofo, I ain't scared to shoot. You won't catch me, man. Fox News, C-SPAN. Back-to-back broadcast shows all week. You can't catch me, man. Fox News, C-SPAN. Back-to-back broadcast shows all week. I said you won't catch me, man. Fox News, C-SPAN. Back-to-back broadcast shows all week. Well, I ain't seen grain since I don't know when. I'm on the rob the press so damn. I don't make no money, don't make no sound. I'm on the rob the press so damn. You gotta pay those bills, you gotta get that rent. I'm on the rob the press so damn. Another year older and deeper and down. I'm on the rob the press so damn. Well, I ain't seen grain since I don't know when. I'm on the rob the press so damn. Don't make no money, don't make no sound. I'm on the rob the press so damn. It's nothing symbolic like burning the flag. Just put all your wallets into the bag. You've robbed me for years and I want it all back. And that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that. The White House mask on, lights out. The Oval Office light, empty your pockets. Stacking up Congress purses while